Welcome everyone to Triday's RoundTable 51, Transcending the Just War Endless War Trap. For more than 1,000 years, the Just War Doctrine has claimed to place moral limits on violence, permitting nations to take up the sword only under strict conditions of defense, justice, and last resort. Yet, history shows how easily these rules have been twisted to justify conquest, genocide, and the machinery of endless war. What began as an effort to restrain bloodshed became again and again a language used to sanctify it. In this roundtable, we ask whether humanity has reached the moment to move beyond the old paradigm entirely. If previous roundtables challenged judgment, empire, and cycles of revenge, Roundtable 51 confronts the deepest inheritance of them all, the belief that war can redeem us. The greatest victims of war are not only children, but also the sons sent to fight their father's battles, creating a profound fracture between generations. Can that broken bond be healed? Can the warrior be transformed into the peacemaker? Join us as we explore a path beyond the just war trap and toward a future rooted in reconciliation, sovereignty, and peace. Join with us to discuss how to end the just war doctrine, stranglehold on the father and his warrior son through JFK's legacy, sacrifice, and promise of peace for all time. These roundtables were started by husband and wife co-authors Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould, who wrote the Valediction series, who have developed a plan for world peace at valediction.net. Click on World Peace at the top banner to learn more about that plan. Today we'll hear from Chris and Liz, and we want everyone to join in with thoughts and suggestions on peace in the world we want to build. But before that, I will introduce our host, Chris Milligan.
Thank you, Adam, very much. And Lord have mercy, do we live in interesting and trying times here? And, this was started basically because Paul is related to the Fitzgeralds of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And, he went out there into the journalism world and found out that even if he got him the correct narrative, they didn't want to hear it. And so this is built around the speech that John F. Kennedy gave at American University. I believe it was in June of 1963. And the thing that makes that speech so wonderful, okay, is that here we had a leader of a country, okay, and at that time, the United States was the main leader in the quote unquote a free world, okay, and talking about, hey, let's don't have war anymore. We all breathe the same air, okay? We all raise our children, and it's one planet. I mean, and how hard is it to understand his motivation too? Because I mean, he was in war. He saw a lot of things, and it's just well, it was a sad day when he left us. Okay, but we are bringing back his spirit of peace, and the world needs peace. Now, this thing is about war, and one thing I did was I went to Google and put in a little thing, how come, people say that, war is purifying and stuff like that. And because we, we, we have to and we can get beyond it so that our planet survives happily. Now, some of the things that they say that, war is an acceleration for innovation. Okay, and it creates stability. I think that those things are just um, excuses for not doing the hard work. Okay, and learning how to get along with all the people on this planet. Instead of some silly rationale. Well, we're right and they're wrong, and so let's go kill them all and stuff like that. So generally, I start these off with some words from John F. Kennedy, and I'm going to do that again today. It's his commencement address at Yale University, June 11th, 1962. This is just, parts of it there. Because it's interesting. He was talking there at Yale University and mentioned a whole bunch of the members of the Order of Skull and Bones. Um, for the great enemy of truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Too often we hold fast to the cliches of our forebears. So we subject all facts to a prefabricated set of interpretations. We enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. Mythology distracts us everywhere, in government as in business, in politics as in economics, in foreign affairs as in domestic affairs. But today, I want to particularly consider the myth and reality in our national economy. In recent months, many have come to feel as I do that the dialogue between the parties, between business and government, between government and people, is clogged by illusion and platitudes and fails to reflect the true realities of contemporary American society. Nearly 150 years ago, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "The new circumstances under which we are placed call for new words, new phrases, and the transfer of old words to new objects. New words, new phrases. This is truer today than it was in the time of Jefferson because the role of this country is so vastly more significant. There is a show in England called Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. You have not chosen to exercise that option. You are part of the world, and you must participate in these days of our years in the solution of the problems that pour upon us, requiring the most sophisticated and technical judgment. And as we work in consonance to meet the authentic problems of our times, we will generate a vision and an energy which will demonstrate anew to the world the superior vitality and the strength of a free society, of a free people." And part of this conversation in it, Paul has done amazing work and discovered amazing things that have led to the discussions here on this roundtable. And also, we came to the conclusion that we can't have peace without justice. And we can't have justice without an economy of justice. And so, one of the things that we have been bringing out here is the politics of Henry George. And Alana, are you prepared to speak a little bit about Henry?
Well, I have a few things to talk about. I wasn't going to talk about him per se, but I did want to say I'm really happy we're having this theme on just war. It's so important because it really shows what happened with the corruption of Christianity. If Christianity had not been corrupted under the Roman Empire, we would have a pathway to peace. I mean, it's pretty simple. Thou shalt not kill. Isn't that Judeo Christianity? How come suddenly you go out and, we had this horrible phrase when many of us were young 60s people growing up anti-Vietnam War. It was kill a commie for Christ, fight against the bad, evil communists, and as if Christ would want to murder and kill. So I do want to mention a couple of things about justice and Henry George. Henry George is what we call pre-distributive justice. Now, what's that mean? First, what is post-distributive? That means that once wealth is unequally divvied up, we have a handful of billionaires with more wealth as the bottom 50% of our population and of the world. Then you try to claw it back from the top. How do we tax the rich? How do we have a highly progressive income tax? What Henry George is about is pre-distributive fairness, justice. That makes the factors of the economy fair to begin with, so that you don't have to try to claw it back because it's not creating multi-billionaires that have made massive unearned income to begin with. So it's very fundamentally different than anything you're going to see with any kind of mainstream, even when they address wealth inequality. So we make sure that the earth, the land, the resources, the gifts of the creator are absolutely fairly shared by everyone as a birthright to the planet, a birthright to the earth. Now, it's not in Christianity because it was corrupted. Otherwise, it would be, because it was Judeo-Christian ethics, that the earth is the koina, the commons, for everyone to share. There were policies built on that. So democracy itself has no basis in economic democracy, fundamental fairness, rights to the creation. So two political events. One is we had a Henry George advocate running in Illinois for the state house, Eric Rangold. He did not get through the primary. Very important, we had Representative Macy from Kentucky. How many of you follow Macy? He is a man of incredible integrity, speaking truth to power. A handful of them in Congress like him, but he was top notch. He still is, but he lost his primary. So let's not pretend we can look to democracy as is constituted with wealth and power inequality to pull us out of the mess we're in or to end war. Now, I see Mary Carlin is here on the call. Mary and I were on a call last night with a TAP, and we had a person who is leading an investigative team in Lahaina, Hawaii, that horrific fire. And they studied it for a couple of years in depth. It really is clear it was another 9/11. Okay. So people going down these rabbit holes, discovering these horrible truths of some horrific abuse of power. And I was surprised at where the speaker took us, Paul Desasarius, was to look at power of groups, the power and cohesiveness of a group of people with goodwill to be able to really shift the power dynamic on the planet. And he was drawing from quantum physics, the quantum field, to shift and increase our frequency and our vibration for empowerment. That's the potential this group has here. So I want to mention an article that Liz brought to my attention in ending. It was about Japan, how the population is a bit stagnant, but they have a lot of surplus available housing, especially outside of Tokyo in the more rural areas. And they have some tax system that's very Henry George, of not taxing the houses and the buildings and shifting the tax to the land value, you can also call it the commons rent. And we found out there's numbers of people from the United States now moving to Japan for affordable housing. Now, isn't that crazy? I don't know how many people in the United States know Japanese, but I would say it's very few. But how many are desperate for affordable housing? And it's very many. So the point is, we can have affordable housing in the United States. It's not a population problem. It's not a lack of the market being able to provision housing. It's structuring the market based on justice, no more land and resource speculation, taking the taxes off of labor and production on housing, building, and putting it on land value so that you curb the speculation and the hoarding. The whole game is based on the land speculation, land hoarding, making a killing in real estate. So each of us can do something about this. We have a national organization. I invite you to join. I'll help you connect with people around where you live, in your state, maybe even in your city. Ain't going to happen unless each of us does something. And together, our doings of a little bit will really add up. So contact me at any point if you feel so moved. a little bit of time each week, you can make a difference with having a just economy, which also means a peace economy. Bravo. Let's do it. And on with the conversation.
Thank you very much, Alana. And Henry George, it's amazing how he got buried. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. It's just amazing. It's really not amazing because it was done by design. Oh, okay. And so uh we do have some work to do here. Uh
I would say.
yes, yes. Alana, now Henry George, he started talking in the late 1800s, okay, and ran for mayor of New York City,
Twice.
okay, but this happened before really the income tax and the Federal Reserve, which really allowed what I call the people in the shadows, the secret societal system, to get their hooks really deep into our country, okay, and so deep that one of the first things they did was to take over the education system and bury people like Henry George. And so I'm so excited to be a part of this group and to be working with Paul and Liz and exploring and creating a new world. We are. We're creating a new world here. So Paul and Liz, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. Well, we're actually going to be giving you a short presentation of our involvement, how we actually got involved with the concept of the just war way back when we first got involved with Afghanistan. And now Paul is going to present it to you.
I just wanted to talk today about just war and the Just War Doctrine and its connection to the history of the Fitzgerald family, and why it's so important to understanding our valediction memoir series. It's our intention that Book 3, Valediction Revelation, will act as a Rosetta Stone to pull together diverse elements to explain the chaotic moment in history we're now in, and how we will be better prepared for the events already in progress. Living at this moment in time reveals to us the true meaning of apocalyptic biblical terms, which had always been taken for granted as a justification for genocide in ancient times. As a family, the Fitzgeralds go back almost 1,000 years to the origins of modern Europe. Knowing their influence is one of those back-channel stories you'll never hear about, but without which you really can't understand history. Friends of ours like to boast about their family's direct ties to the Mayflower in 1620, to which I usually respond that the Fitzgeralds were firing arrows at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. My own family managed to hold on to a 500-acre farm on land conquered in the invasion of Ireland by the Norman Strongbow in 1170. So when people today talk about the British being colonizers, I can say we were one of the families who personally colonized the colonizers. These are some of the pieces of Fitzgerald puzzle that fit together with our JFK research. But one of the most intriguing is the Just War Doctrine of the Catholic Church. We first encountered the Just War Doctrine in 1980, when a couple of American defense intellectuals argued in a Foreign Policy magazine article that the US would be justified in using a first strike nuclear attack on the Soviet Union for their invasion of Afghanistan, based on the terms cited in it. At the time, we couldn't imagine how a medieval doctrine could justify an apocalyptic nuclear war. But over the years, we've discovered going biblical wasn't that unusual. So here's a summary of a chapter from Valediction Book 2, Resurrection, and how Liz and I came to understand the spiritual war behind American foreign policy as we wrote it in 2022. Quote, there were lots of evidence kicking around the Cold War had a spiritual dimension that nobody talked about. Medievalist and author Umberto Eco brought the Knights Templar and the Holy Grail legend back to life in his 1988 novel, Foucault's Pendulum. Eco had taken the suspicions about the Templars' real purpose for camping out at the site of Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem and given the operation a 20th century reality check. I told Liz that according to Echo, quote, the Templars were created as an elite vanguard of the Merovingian line of the House of David to obtain and secure occult secrets in the Holy Land and make them the return and make ready the return of the true Messiah. Through the influence of their heretical Cathar backers in France and England, they'd become a powerful autonomous deep state within medieval society with an apocalyptic plan to fulfill biblical prophecy and remove anybody who stood in the way. That's why Newsweek claimed the CIA considered themselves to be modern Templars, Liz said. That was apparently the plan all along, I responded. As we experienced in Afghanistan, the more we probed this new esoteric background to geopolitics, the more the official historical narrative fell apart. And as I grew sympathetic to the message, a powerful alternative narrative began to reveal itself to us. I found this definition of the Templars in A.E. Waite's 1925 Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, I told Liz. The Islamic sect of Ishmaelites gave birth in the last quarter of the 11th century to that of the Assassins. On this sect, order, or society, it has been affirmed that Hugh de Payen modeled the Knights Templar. And so the truth about the origin of the Knights Templar was coming into focus. But what about its transfer to Freemasonry, Liz asked. If the Knights Templar were agents for the Merovingian line of the House of David and wanted their Jewish king to be the King of Kings, wouldn't they want all the other kingdoms under their control? Of course, I said. Listen to this quote by the Jewish writer Bernard Lazare. It is certain that they were Kabbalistic Jews at the cradle of Freemasonry, as proved by some of the rites that have been preserved. During the years that preceded the French Revolution, they probably entered in greater numbers still into such councils and founded secret societies themselves. The Jews swarmed into Freemasonry from the earliest times and controlled the higher grades of the Scottish Rite since the beginning of the 19th century. And there were Jews around Adam Weishaupt, founder of the Bavarian Illuminati and former Jesuit. Weren't the Illuminati supposed to be behind the Enlightenment, Liz asked? It's been speculated they go back to Zoroaster in ancient Afghanistan, thousands of years before Plato. So how does that get us back to the Templars, Liz asked. Look at page 42, I said, reading on. Monsignor Sigur, Bishop of Grenoble, informs us that the real secret of Freemasonry consisted even then, in 1747, of disbelief in the divinity of Christ and a determination to replace that doctrine with rationalism. Monsignor Sigur tells us that Laelius Socinus, the hierarch and founder of Unitarianism, gave his followers the title Freemasons and invented the allegory of the Temple of Solomon. This temple, destroyed by Christ for the Christian order, was to be restored by Freemasonry after the Christ, and the Christian order should be obliterated by conspiracy and revolution. The state of nature was the Hiram whose murder Masonry was to avenge, and which, having previously removed Christ, was to resuscitate Hiram by rebuilding the temple of nature as it had been before. Liz stood quietly for a moment before motioning for the book. Monsignor Sigur, she said, reading, connects modern Freemasonry with the Jews and the Templars. The Jews, for many centuries previous to the Reformation, had formed secret societies for their own protection and for the destruction of Christianity, which persecuted them, which they very much hated. The rebuilding of the Temple of Solomon was the dream of their lives. They had special reason to welcome with joy such heretics as were cast off by Catholicism. It is therefore not at all improbable that they admitted into their secret conclaves some at least of the discontented Templars, burning for revenge upon those who dispossessed and suppressed the order. Liz shook her head in wonder. So they didn't accept the divinity of Jesus and claim that he destroyed the Temple of Solomon. But then why did they consider his bloodline to be the holy blood, the sangreal of the Grail? They didn't, I said. The sangreal, the sacred blood, is a 19th century invention perpetuated by a secret society called the Priory of Sion. The pagan rituals had nothing to do with Jesus. Jerusalem, rebuilding the Temple of Solomon or the Knights Templar. It's a belief system manufactured to justify the Illuminati's objective. And the Illuminati's objective is to direct human destiny toward the demiurge, the craftsman of the physical universe. Also known as Yahweh or Ahriman. I get it, Liz added. So where were the Fitzgeralds in this cosmic war of light against dark? Right in the middle of it, and for 400 years, I said. With all these Masonic lodges incubating persecuted Templars, Gnostics, Manichaeans, and Cathars, all they needed was an Illuminati frontman. Martin Luther showed up in 1517 with his 95 Theses, and the Protestant Reformation was on its way, I added. So, Liz said, staring at the pile of books we'd accumulated, the Fitzgeralds came to England during the Norman conquest in the 11th century. They were successful builders and managers for the new royal family and became trusted members of the Familia Regis, which evolved into the Privy Council. Gerald, Constable of Windsor Castle, was chosen to advance King William II's march into Wales, and in 1097 married the Welsh princess Nest, making all their children from then on sons of Gerald, or the Fitzgeralds. That's it, I said as Liz proceeded. Gerald of Wales made clear in his book, The Expugnatio Hibernica, that by 1170 his family was fed up with Henry II and his children and wanted to strike out under their own banner in Ireland, and grew to be the most powerful family in Ireland as the Dukes of Leinster and the Earls of Desmond. And that's when they got into big trouble, I added as Liz continued. Forsaking the English language, English customs, and English law, the Fitzgeralds' ongoing intermarriage with Irish clans brought on sanctions from London and accusations of creating a race of their own. Known for their loyalty to Rome and family, was marked as agents of the Counter-Reformation. But the most interesting of London's responses came from the Sydney Circle, which some have called the School of Night, an ancient stream of religious consciousness that had been suppressed for centuries and committed to ridding the world of the Roman Church. And that's where the revenge for the crusade against the Cathars and the destruction of the Knights Templar comes together, I offered. Liz continued, the Sydney Circle and its primary conjurers, Francis Walsingham, Humphrey Gilbert, Edmund Spencer, and John Dee, represented the militarized edge of Renaissance Neoplatonism. Their goal was not just to replace Catholic Spain as a global empire, but to restore an ancient pre-Christian belief system suppressed by the church. That system would encompass both the physical and the astral realms and fulfill a biblical prophecy subverted by Rome. And the first step to that destiny was the conquest of Ireland. Their plan required removing the Fitzgerald Earl of Desmond in a genocidal war of extermination, which continued on to November 22nd, 1963, Liz said, finishing off. There was a magical element to the Elizabethan War that I never knew about, I added. I read The Fairy Queen when I was a freshman at BU. I had the book in my dressing room at the Wilbur Theater when I met you. I had no idea that the Fairy Queen was an allegory for their war against the Earl of Desmond, and that the Earl had used the Just War Doctrine to defend his family. I was drawn to Afghanistan because of the Just War Doctrine. Colin Gray and Keith Payne's 1980 Victory is Possible. Might makes right. Back in the 16th century, the Fitzgerald had the doctrine invoked for them by the papal nuncio. Quote, a just war requires three conditions: a just cause, a lawful power, and the means of carrying on a lawful war. It shall be made clear that all three conditions are fulfilled, and that the cause of this war in Ireland is God's glory. For natural law empowers us to defend ourselves against the very manifest tyranny of heretics, and evangelical law empowers us to defend ourselves against those who belie the glory of Christ. And so the just and lawful war began against the Elizabethan heretics with a papal blessing, and the Fitzgeralds were in turn transformed into the embodiment of evil in a cosmic war of light and dark. The Second Elizabethan War against the Desmond Fitzgeralds was unprecedented in its savagery, even by 16th century standards, with the true story suppressed by London for generations. Even today, the full extent of the depravity remains unknown, and there's no way that the deep hatred generated against the last Fitzgerald, Earl of Desmond in 1583 wasn't repeated on November 22nd, 1963. A recent assessment on the Irish Holocaust following the beheading of the last Earl and the conquest of Southern Ireland speaks for itself in its graphic terms of genocide. Quote, the Irish came as slaves, human cargo transported on British ships bound for the Americas. They were shipped by the hundreds of thousands and included men, women, and even the youngest of children. Slave owners would hang their human property by their hands and set their feet on fire as one form of punishment. Some were burned alive with their heads piked and displayed in the marketplace as a warning to other captives. King James VI led a continued effort to enslave the Irish, selling 30,000 Irish prisoners as slaves to the New World. His proclamation of 1625 required Irish political prisoners to be sold to English settlers in the West Indies. By the mid-1600s, the Irish were the main slaves sold to Antigua and Montserrat. The majority of the early slaves to the New World were actually white Europeans defeated in battle. Ireland's population fell from about 1,500,000 to 600,000 in a single decade. The African slave trade was just beginning during the same period. It is well recorded that African slaves, not tainted with the stain of the hated Catholic theology and more expensive to purchase, were often treated far better than their Irish counterparts. I began my second memoir in this valediction series with the death of my Uncle Ray. Ray was a deeply religious man and a high-level New York executive. Like JFK, he was a World War II Navy veteran who'd served in the Pacific, and like JFK, carried the scars of his experience with him long after the war ended. To me, Ray was a symbol of America's post-war Catholic hierarchy, faithfully ascending the corporate ladder, only to find that for Catholics, the ladder didn't go all the way to the top. Because of Ray, I'd learned about a divide caused by the Reformation, and that the wars spawned by it were still being fought out on a daily basis inside the boardrooms across America. Ray was my godfather, and so with his passing, a very special window closed through which I'd witnessed a mid-20th century Roman Catholic world order. I'd also witnessed how that ancient world order still worked its influence, and as I got further into my family research, discovered the rules of its hierarchy were as deeply embedded in me as they were in Ray. Ray died surrounded by his family and was buried near his beloved St. Anselm's College in New Hampshire. But there was another connection to the place I hadn't thought about at the time. And now I felt it was somehow playing a role in helping me reassemble my family's purpose. Anselm had been the late 11th century Archbishop of Canterbury during the reign of King William Rufus, coincidentally at a time when Gerald of Windsor married Welsh Princess Nest and created the Fitzgerald family. Rufus was the son of William the Conqueror and died in what was reported to be a hunting accident in the New Forest on August 2nd, 1100. But there were ancient rituals surrounding Anglo-Saxon kingship, and as I watched the Benedictine monks close around Ray's coffin, I began to wonder whether there might not still be some hidden secrets at play that we had absolutely no way of understanding. Ray's religious bodyguard had reminded me of the warrior monks established at the time of Anselm and the First Crusade, for whom war was a direct route to God. But it wasn't until my oldest brother Bill's funeral passing just a few months ago that I saw how God still headed this martial hierarchy and had presided over my own personal family life without a word of it ever being spoken. When I used to think about war, I never considered it as a sacrament, maintained for future generations. So how did it become such an important part of our lives? And why have we been trapped into thinking we can't survive without it? An explanation appeared recently by the revered military historian Dr. Michael Vlahos in an article titled The Demon in America's Sacred Narrative. Quote, America is religion, he writes. On July 4th, 1776, the United States was baptized with these words, quote, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. By this oath, a nation was born and launched on its mythic passage of becoming. The founders, our creators, had imagined more than a nation, however. They had also drafted the story arc of a divine heroic journey, centering the United States as the culmination of history. This is America's sacred narrative. Since its founding, the United States has pursued with burning religious fever a higher calling to redeem humanity, punish the wicked, and christen a golden millennium on earth. American civil religion is inextricably linked with the Reformation, Calvinist Christianity, and the bloody history of Protestantism, with America's sacred narrative shaped and christened through the country's first and second Great Awakenings. The apocalypse that brings the promised millennium to mankind must necessarily reflect the apocalyptic yearning in the American gospel itself. Rebirth thus requires passage through the cleansing fires of war. Indeed, obsession with the purifying, consecrating potential of the trials and terrors inherent in war is the demon that lurks hidden in the warren of our sacred literature. This demonic possession, which war has been hardwired into America's very birth as a nation. I want to thank Michael Vlahos for getting to the heart of the matter and take it to the next level by suggesting that the demon possessing America is the underdog America under the heel of the British Empire, still hanging around from its colonial days. As with Israel, forever seeing itself as a lowly David against the massive Goliath, the underdog always sees itself as justified in doing anything in order to survive, and when it comes to genocide, sees it as a necessity. I ended this today with Michael Vlahos, not only because of his unique spiritual overview of American history, but because he received his doctorate from Tufts Fletcher School at the same time we were confronted by the dean of the Fletcher School, Theodore Elliott, over our right as American journalists to travel to Soviet-occupied Afghanistan and tell the story of life there as we saw it. If anyone in America represented America's sacred narrative born of the Reformation, Calvinist Christianity, and the bloody history of Protestantism, it was the Boston Brahmin Theodore Elliott, descendant of a Salem witch trial judge and former American ambassador to Afghanistan and Secretary General of the American chapter of the Bilderberg Organization. But if anyone represented the demon within the bloody history of Protestantism and its vendetta against the Fitzgeralds that lay hidden in the warren of our sacred narrative justifying the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, it was also Theodore Elliott. And as he threatened to put the fear of God in me for challenging the official narrative of America's support for a holy war against the Afghan people, I thought about the Just War Doctrine, and then just turned to the demon he'd brought with him, took a deep breath, and let him have it. Thank you.
Wow. Wow, Paul. You keep stitching, this story together. And, who knew about the Fitzgerald history?
Yeah.
I
know. Well, it's just informed so many things in my own life that just happened to go together by coincidence or serendipity and put me in harm's way in a way that I had to think about things in a way I never considered. That, and people would say to me, "Oh, you're a Fitzgerald," out of nowhere. And I'd say, "Well, what does that mean?" And bit by bit by bit, these things began to fall into place. And then, of course, meeting Liz when I had a choice. The very day that I signed up for the audition for hair, the last day of my first semester at Boston University, I got invited to my faculty advisor's apartment, which I thought was kind of strange. And he said to me, have you considered working for your government? I understand that you are a very, very controversial writer in your class, at BU, in your freshman year. And I didn't really think I'd done much of anything in my first semester. But here I was being told that I was very provocative in the terms in which I was writing and that my talent could be put to very good use by the US government. So it turns out I wound up doing the audition. They loved my singing voice and they hired me. And so that's how I got to meet Liz. I got to meet a whole different world, got invited to New York to meet the hoi polloi of New York theater and acting class, and had the time of my life for a year.
And
So-
then reality.
And then reality, of course, struck home. What was I going to do with this as a career?
Yeah.
So at any rate, so here I am, and thanks to you, Chris, and some of our people, that all of our people that are here with us today. It really is. We're here to tell you that if you do, as Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss and your belief in your own destiny. It really does pay off in ways that you may not be aware of as it's happening, even if it's very devious and very dire. The fact is that it's pushing you to find that inner truth that you were brought here for, or that you actually chose to be here for. So, and the people who are with you and doing these kinds of things with you have been sent along the way and are part of your cuirass in order to find that end.
Yeah.
Meaning.
I would like to make one quick point about how things circle around and how you have to begin to notice these circles. Our Afghan partner, Sima Ali, was the first Afghan refugee to come to this country in 1978. She was sponsored by Theodore Eliot. So, once again, this idea that, that there's some kind of coalescing of things coming together, and you just don't always realize why it's there. And that's why, as we get into the minutia of this, we're seeing a kind of a quickening of that process happening. We hope it's going to lead to the fulfillment, of course.
Amen. Amen. I mean, again, these roundtables and the explorations into the Fitzgerald family and what that shows us about our history, and then, looking at the murder of our president, which was presented to us in a way that, oh, well, this guy did it in a story that any 5-year-old could break. Okay. It implies that there is, this psychological warfare handling that's been happening here on our great country. Okay. That was a culmination, okay, of many generations of people, saying, hey, why can't we do this together as ourselves instead of having to listen to some king or some pope tell us what to do? And so now we, have this grand experiment of government of and by and for the people that is being corrupted in our face every day. And it is. Do we have some comments out there from people? Anybody want to discuss what Paul and Liz have brought here today?
I can throw a thought out that I hope might stir some comments. I think that the most important point to really bring into this is the fact that the demon that is actually being described was part of the original setting up of the country. So it came along with the process, and that seems to be a part of the side effect, you might say, of war itself. So you have that's the just war in the first place. When you are the one who is the colony of the British Empire, you get to do what you get to do with war because you're under the pressure of the imperialists. When you then become the imperialist, apparently nobody seems to notice that. And that, I think, is part of what, I think in looking at our crisis today, okay, that it isn't really a surprise when you see the repeated process throughout history. Why did Rome go from a republic to an empire? Why and when did the United States go from what we obviously would have liked to believe is a republic, to an empire. So this process does seem to have a recognizable pattern. Okay. And
Yeah, there was a big discussion, at the end of the 1800s, okay, during the Spanish-American War, that they were taking America away from a republic to an empire, and that's also where my research has shown where the Order of Skull and Bones was able to really get their deep hooks into our country, and then we have the situation of uh, a more perfect union because the many of the people in Boston, okay, and other places tried to get the Southern gentlemen to renounce the slave trade, but they didn't. So we've had that quote unquote stain within our within our country for a long time, and uh, it just beggars the belief of of what is it that our country is going to be? Where are we going, and how can we present this about war to people that we go towards peace?
right. Well, it would seem that we are dealing with a predictable problem. That I think maybe that's the good news. This actually is not surprising. It is a pattern that's been repeated over and over again. And maybe, the whole point about this thing called end time, is really the opportunity to reflect on that, to reflect on the stages of the process. And if war itself seems to be the problem, then, and it's, and we've gone from the justifiable war to this, what we now know, it is justifying genocide. And that I've actually come to believe that all war is genocide. There is no such thing as a just war. That violence and the use of violence and force, no matter what, is results in it has results that you cannot anticipate. That's my point. So by choosing that path and believing that you have a right because you are the oppressed, okay, that has been used and we've seen it turn inside out over and over and over again. It kind of reminds me of the use of violence with raising children. If you look at the pattern of children who have been treated with violence, that has been justified in many families as necessary. And we're talking about the acceptable level of that kind of justification. And who becomes the parents who abuse their children? And in the more modern era, where it's identified as abuse, it's no longer accepted. So maybe we have these patterns that we can recognize and deal with and help. I think, Alana, if you have a thought, please join.
Well, I agree, Liz, that all war is genocide, all war is child abuse, and war must be abolished. We got to get that through. Abolish slavery. We know what that was like, although many people are still enslaved on the planet one way or the other. But war is genocide. Now, in the past couple or 3 months, I've given 5 or 6 podcast webinars on the theme of economics of war and peace. I gave that here to this group a year or so ago. And there's no big mystery here. If we're for peace and against war, why the heck are we paying to build bombs and to kill other people? Revolutions have almost always come down to taxes. I know it's not a very sexy topic. I didn't think I'd be interested in taxes when I was a young woman. I was wanting to know what's spiritual enlightenment, what is emotional healing, what's the causes of poverty and war. I never thought I'd be interested in taxes, but I'm telling you, we might vote once or twice every year or two, but it doesn't matter. They don't care. As long as we keep shoveling the taxes in, and as long as we keep letting them put ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren into odious debt to pay for the wars, and we just let it happen like sheep, it's not going to change until, there's some kind of obliteration event. So I am always trying to find guidance in my life for how I can get this message out. It's not just me. There is a movement, but it's too small. The movement that wants to take taxes off of working people and shift it onto the unearned income that accrues to land and resources. Why? Because that's almost always what war is about. Even if it looks like a religious war or this or that, you scratch the surface, somebody's trying to control other people's territory and grab. Okay, land grabbing, land and resource control, basis of imperialist wars. So if I sound a little impetuous and impatient, I guess you'll have to live with it or apologize to me, or make me apologize. I'm not. But I'm pretty impatient that we're just hearing these ideas. And we got to have action in the world. We've got to have more of us demanding to stop the wars by stop paying our taxes. When I was young, I was in a peace group with elder people like me now. And I said, why don't you just stop paying your taxes? Oh no, we'll lose our house. Well, there's fear. There's fear about doing the right thing because there's risks. I don't know, form some kind of land trust and everybody put their houses in a trust so that it can't be taken away. I gave my property and my children so I could be a war tax protester, and they're kind of more conservative, I guess, than me. So there's one way to safeguard. I would have put it in a family trust, but lawyer, I couldn't find to do that. So I'm telling you, folks, don't tell me you're against war and you're paying taxes to build the bombs that kill the people. Just don't. I don't want to hear it. It's the height of hypocrisy. I don't want to be with hypocrites. I don't want to support hypocrites. I want to be with people who will take a stand seriously against war. And the reason I might sound impetuous is because sometimes I get a little impatient of what one more email I have to delete about, oh, ain't it awful? Oh, they just bombed this and they just killed so many. I am really fucking sick and tired of it. Okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Did
And
I get my point across?
Yeah.
You did.
Thank you, Alana.
and they're asking for 1.5 trillion. Okay.
Yeah,
Next year,
right. We're going to give it to them, right?
For the Department of War.
War.
You know, and
Zen.
so yeah.
So
Zen, you want to talk?
I'm not sure, and maybe what my couple of questions should wait till later. This was an absolutely fascinating historical analysis, and I'm not asking about that. So if you want to discuss the historical analysis more, my questions have to do with what are we going to do next? Should I ask now
Good question.
or
Sure.
later? Okay, so the first one is really to Alana. And I'm curious to know whether these to you seem like two separate groups or two groups that might converge. In other words, all of the work that you've done on Henry George and applying his principles, presumably to taxation requirements in the United States. And then the contrasting group, and the question is, could these groups merge? Is there are a number of people looking at the concept of some sort of international taxation mechanism. And of course, the wealthiest people all live in the United States. There are wealthy people elsewhere, but the top ones are in the United States, and the corporations are in the United States. But the problems like climate change, war, right, are global problems. And so there are people like Gabriel Zucman in Paris, but he also has a position at UC Berkeley, but I think he's 100% in Paris right now, looking at the prospect of some sort of taxation system on the wealthy to address global problems. That's my first question. And my second question is more general. But, I've been struggling with this for a long time, and I've known Paul and Liz since the 1980s. I've been very impressed by the clarity of their trajectory. I don't think mine has been as clear, but I feel that I've finally gotten an entry point to what I think we need to do, because we have no system for coalition building around issues except class action lawyers. And so if every problem has to, go on and on and on and on, like Monsanto released the toxic herbicide Roundup in 1974, and it took 44 years before there was a lawsuit, class action lawsuit against Monsanto that brought down Monsanto. Didn't completely bring down Monsanto. Bayer bought Monsanto for $63 billion. And that is one of the big drivers of the Ukraine war, because Monsanto, or Bayer now, the Monsanto division of Bayer, wants to use this toxic herbicide and all the patented seeds that can resist the herbicide in the Ukraine. So the question there is, if we have to wait for class action lawyers to say this is a profitable thing that's worth putting our time into, we have no way that all the people experiencing cancer after using this pesticide can actually find each other, right? So to me, that's the next thing we have to do. It's not easy, but Wikipedia proved its effectiveness in 11 months, right? LinkedIn is not what we need, but it proved its effectiveness also extremely quickly. I mean, both of these concepts for social platforms, they're valid when you have one biography on LinkedIn, or you have one example of a co-created article on Wikipedia. Obviously, it's a lot more validity the more articles you have and the more people you have. But we don't have a social network that is empowering. And that's, I think, what we need. Second question, big question.
Anybody want to have an answer?
Well, Alana, I wanted to ask you, based on what Zan is saying, because you're looking for the action to expand what you have, which is a tight group that are dedicated but can't seem to break through at this more mainstream level effectively enough, so that all those Americans who needed housing, instead of getting the housing problem solved here through the land value tax, are relocating to Japan. That's insane. So I think that's what I would suggest, that I think you and Alana should, and Zan and Alana should have a chat about how what Zan's talking about might be somehow connected to your ability to be able to get more out through this kind of platform.
Well, I think that would be good, but she's made 3 points that I can quickly address all 3 of them if you don't mind.
Yeah.
First, she wants to tax the wealthy, or saying some people want an international tax. Well, it usually look at progressive taxes like clawback from the wealthy. And I've been involved with the United Nations and NGO for decades, and the financing for development. How do you finance all these good things that we want on the planet? And it comes back to, the billionaire class are always going to find a way not to be taxed. They're going to always find a way to hide it, to show legitimate business, so-called investment. So don't look to progressive income tax. Look deeper to the roots of the tree. Most of those billionaires there wouldn't be any if we had fair rights to the earth, because you wouldn't work for for a wage that wasn't sufficient, or you wouldn't work for a job that you hate. There'll always be good economic opportunity once you address this fundamental problem of treating the earth like a commodity. So it's got a tax shift off of work and wages and onto the land rent. And that's not obvious until you think about it and hear a little bit more about it. But it's the unearned income that accrues to the planet, the unearned income to land and resources. So that's the tax. Class action lawsuits. There needs to be how many hundreds and hundreds of lawsuits, all for one lawsuit against this, all for what? Look, at the expense of the time. We're talking about power, whether it's Monsanto or whatever. The power structure. It's illegitimate power. And it's expressed in all these different social problems. Leo Tolstoy said solving the land problem means the solving of all social problems, because it gets at the root of wealth and power inequality. Okay? the person-planet relationship. Look around where you sit right now. Everything comes from the dirt, and these hands and this brain working up the dirt from the earth. All this amazing stuff. It just comes from the dirt. If you privatize and have private profit and have just a few owning the dirt, what do you think's going to happen? They're going to play a power game over everybody else. So that's class action lawsuits. I wouldn't put a lot of hope into it. You might win one here and there, but at great time, labor, and expense. Now, groups. One thing from listening to the TAP Talk last night, I mentioned Lahaina, and he talked about how he's formed a very strong local group. Like 30, 40 people meet every week. And I agree that getting involved with like-minded people right where you live, looking at, and I have a 10-point plan for how you build a local-based economy that strengthens people, communities, and economies. So we can't look to Washington. Don't look for heroes, except for the heroes in your community like yourself. Form strong, cohesive, intentional local groups. They do exist, Zane. Maybe you don't see one under your nose, but there might be groups concerned about homelessness and of different issues in your community. There is in mine. I've been going to. Their community leaders and some local public officials show up and church leaders concerned about the homeless situation. So that's where you start. Just get involved right where you are, and then you can start linking all these other issues. And ultimately, you're going to link to where's our taxes coming from and where are they going. You know, you look at it locally, it's not much for local needs, that's for sure. Okay, so that's your three main points as I took them, Zane.
Amen. Amen.
Mirror, you might be Persian originally. It would be very interesting to hear what you have to say.
Hi, Zan. Thank you. And thank you, Paul and Liz, for that great presentation about the sort of historical aspect of war and feud and conflict, and also the present day of war. So I think it's a good place to start, actually, the education part of war and why war happens, and particularly the impact that it has, because we so often talk about who is more powerful, who has the biggest weapon, who can kill more, who is the hero of war. But we rarely talk about the disastrous impacts of war on those people who actually suffer, and it's mostly this women and children. So if we begin with educational meetings and gatherings and communities about the impacts that war has on innocent people and the suffering that it causes, that education can raise awareness and hopefully change a lot more minds and hearts about turning against war. Because often we talk about, you know, those who cause war, they create this, manufacture consent of this is our nation, this is our country. You know, they justify a way of conducting those wars, as you said. You know, justification has become so easy, and so you don't really need to do so much. It's just, you know, a few media appearances, like, you know, yeah, our country is at risk or our land. But if we talk about that, we're all human beings, and the destruction that happens and the suffering that happens, and I think at the end of the day, we all share that senses of togetherness and humanity and care about each other. And that way we can turn hopefully more people against the impact that it has, not against, you know, who is stronger, who can kill more, who has the biggest weapon, who is the hero of war, but the impact that it has on the innocent people, particularly women and children. So events like this, discussions like this, I think it's a very good start, and particularly the education elements of the root causes and the historical aspects of it is great, but we need more of these. We need to engage more. We need to bring more people from, you know, all corners of this planet to talk about, because this is our planet. If one part of this planet is burning, and it will impact the other part. So if we just see it as a whole of our home, this planet, but also as a whole humanity, and work towards a peaceful, whether that's resolution or ambition. Hopefully that way we can have a more progress. So I just wanted to thank you for that, for this event, and also for that presentation. Yeah, just a comment.
Well, Mur, can I ask you, your book is out now in England, correct?
That's right. Yes.
What type of response are you getting? Are you able to have any presentations on the media there, or how is it being received?
So initially, the book was, when it was in hardback, first year, it was because of the security of my family, it went under a pseudonym. So I wasn't able to get out in the media and talk about it. But this year it has been in paperback. I've had quite a few talks in sort of literary festivals and in events, but not so much of a mainstream media.
So you've been meeting with people. What is their response to your book?
Well, whoever has read it, they have a very positive response in terms of, if it's very timely, it's very important, we need to talk about, we need to read it. So I get a lot of positive comments for the people who have actually read it, but I think not, it hasn't really been out there, and not many people have discovered this. So I think that's something that more visibility is needed. But if the people who have read, they have had this, this is an important topic to talk about, it, the impacts of war, the destruction and the suffering, and that's what the book is talking about, particularly children.
Yeah.
I have a comment too.
Liz?
Yeah, I did want to make a quick comment about Mir's point. We realize, of course, that right now, I would say it's a safe bet that a majority of people around the world are absolutely horrified at the outright genocide that we've been witnessing. And we can see that it is still a horrific struggle to get that power out, to get that power forward to a place that can begin to decommission. We know, and you're talking about in Alana's case, the amount of resources that the United States is throwing at war. We are literally, seeing a continuing justification for that. There is literally almost no impact at all. So I think, and this is actually what happened for the Iraq War too, if you remember. There was a worldwide movement against the Iraq War, and it didn't stop it. It couldn't. So I think we are learning. I think it's unbelievably slow, and it's painful. Part of the reason it's so painful is because we're all realizing that it is very difficult to figure out what to do to maintain your humanity and not ultimately become what they are in order to stop them. And that is an actual struggle we are in right now. So I think that's why we are offering these other ideas about the nature of the war itself and the origin of it and the evolution to think about, because when you're confronting the demon, I think maybe, and that demon, I think, lives in every one of us. But some of us have learned to process the demon, in under our authority, okay? So that it isn't easily pulled out, so that we jump on the bandwagon, which is always used to generate the support. And it does, create, challenges, because I think, as Alana's expressing, and Zan, that we feel a sense of this, ineffectiveness, as if, why can't we have our voice heard? So that would be my
I just want to throw a small thing out, small detail for Mir, but also relative to what you're doing in a larger sense. I don't know if you've heard of the organization Global Regenerative Collab, grc.earth. Anyway, I think they would be very interested. I've just gone to your website and looked at what you're doing. I think they'd be very interested and be able to host you to give a talk on your book. And they're not a huge organization, but they have global reach, people from Africa, Asia, right? 1,000+ people. And the head of the organization has a degree in public policy from the Kennedy School at Harvard, and a very smart guy. So I'd suggest you try that.
Well,
And
Thank
actually,
you.
I'll be
Thank you.
giving a presentation to them on June 5th on what the kind of the intellectual basis for this next step of an empowering social network as opposed to
Yeah.
the Facebook, LinkedIn type social networks that we have now, because I think we can do it. And I think that's the way we need to do it to have the coalition strength. I think, Alana, you really didn't understand what I said, because I was not advocating class action lawsuits. I was saying the problem is that that's our only mechanism, and we need an alternative.
yeah, yeah. I mean, uh, the oh, I made some notes here, and I can't read them. Isn't that terrible?
I do that to myself.
But here it is. We've got a situation. We have the Secretary of War going out there saying, no quarter, okay, which is a war crime. We had the President of the United States, okay, saying that he was going to destroy a civilization, okay. Now, whether that was a negotiating technique or not, it's still a horrific thing to say. Okay, so we have more comments out here about this topic of just war. Just war. Is it a just war? Can we adjust war out of here? Um, Again,
Well-
anybody have something to say upon this subject?
Well, I always
There we go. We got some hands up there. Okay, Mary, you had your hand up for a while, but it went away.
Yeah, there was a hand before me,
Yeah,
so I
let me
Mary.
oh, I just wanted to say, at this point, I'm aware that there's a different frequency of what's happening right now planetarily. And my own experience is that there's an opening of the heart chakra and love. It's not going to be, Darwin, the survival of the fittest. It's going to be survival of the most loving. And part of what they showed last night, this is like a weekly TAP talk. It's Truth Action Project. And it's like they keep coming back with, we're lied to regularly. We're just lied to regularly. And that part of what has been shown, they're not explaining it yet, but we've seen witness of it, is the Twin Towers turning to dust, and new energy sources that we are going to be allowed to use that are going to be part of the solutions. And that by maintaining a higher frequency of love, that is building this force that is going to help us defeat, and that we've all chosen to be here now. I really believe that this is something that we're birthing a new humanity, and the opportunity of what that presents. Hope is my constant companion. And, the work that I do at the UN with Earth Day on the equinox, it's a small thing. We have a shared moment around the planet, sacred, shared moment. But it's peace, justice, and care of Earth. And, back to Native American sensibilities. But everything's moving and alive. And we have to retrain ourselves to be able to access some of this. And they said really meditation is part of the key. And I'm like, wow, what a ride we're all on, and I'm happy to keep learning about all this stuff. And that's what I wanted to say.
Good place to be.
Thank you, Mary.
Mary, quickly to Mary. Mary, you didn't mention that the Equinox Earth Day, the original Earth Day, was founded on Henry George economics. Don't forget. That
in
was John McConnell, the Economics of Peace, that got lost when it became April 22nd, Earth Day, with the powers that be and the money that be got behind it. And it
Yeah.
completely lost the share the earth of Henry George, which was a key principle of the Earth Day that you worked so hard for how many, 50 years, to ring that bell at the exact moment of equinox at the United Nations or across the street and around the world. So don't forget that part, Mary.
Okay, so with that said, you know, McConnell, it's also the same thing. It's like the similar with Henry George. McConnell was like, well, we don't need to hear about this, but we'll go with April 22nd, the corporate, you know.
Yeah, that's just,
But, you know, to me, it also, you know, it's really going to be interesting, but I remain hopeful because this idea of like community, and you'll know if you're with the right people that how it feels. I mean, there's going to be a lot of challenges. We're not getting through this so easy. You know, I mean, what's predicted? You know, buckle your seatbelt, but by having that higher frequency in love and gratitude and respect, and, you know, there's maybe new things that we're going to be learning, and perhaps other potential influences will be shared. And maybe we'll be allowed to know some of the techniques and things from earlier civilizations that lived here, that were here, that predate us.
Well,
So we're going to relearn history.
Hope is wonderful because it's very easy to be discouraged in this day and age. Mira, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, you mentioned about the language, the type of language being used, like the destruction of civilizations and the departments of war and the glorifications of war and destruction is important. I think words does matter, and it has power, it carries power. And using that sort of extreme languages, it normalizes violence, war, and conflict. So it really is, especially if you are at that sort of position of power, that whatever you say, everyone can see and hear, and somehow normalize it, that sort of not just the language, but also the action, the you know, violence. So it is important, but I think what can be done is that we as a people, you know, eventually do hold the power. So if we do have a counter narrative and a counter argument and you know, a different type of language and semantics to talk about, you know, it still has its impact. It may not be as loud, it may not be as clear, but I think you know, it does carry. So using that sort of language is dangerous, but also discussions like this, if we have more of these, also is as powerful. So I just wanted to comment on that. Zan, you sort of, thank you for that very comment, and also mentioning this organization. But you initially mentioned that I was Persian, so I guess from my name it sounds, but I'm originally from Afghanistan. Yeah, so but that part of language, the part of area of the world has, you know, been quite sort of share. It's quite close in terms of proximity, in terms of culture. So, but I'm originally from Afghanistan. But yeah.
And you know, the thing about, you know, locally and then us, you know, working together, because we have this ability now with the internet and the personal computer to connect, you know, all the way around the world with many people. And, you know, we need to continue to do what we can do and work this power. Any last word? Paul and Liz, do you have some last words here today? And anybody else have any last words?
Well, I could throw something in, but if Paul and Liz have,
No, please do, Zan.
Throw it in.
No, please throw it in.
but so I was drawing a Venn diagram to try to explain what I'm working on with this new concept of a social network, and the whole idea was that you could migrate from something that was a kind of a fun domain to an action domain. And the example was bird watchers, right? So you're a bird watcher, right? And maybe that's because our back end is special interest groups, SIGs, which is borrowed from computer science language. So suppose you're a bird watcher, but then you intersect with the biodiversity of birds and the people who care about that. And then you find out that Iran had a larger diversity of birds than the all of Europe before Trump attacked, right? And so you get from something as neutral as being a bird watcher to saying, wait a minute, war is not just the number of humans killed and injured, it's all the native life that is killed and the ecosystems that are destroyed. And the point there being that if you had a knowledge platform based where champions of different interests, we're leading different interest groups. And I'm just talking with a few now, but one of them is this GRC that I mentioned, the head of GRC. So they're going to be working with us. And that's the area of sustainability, climate change, food, that domain. But if you had champions of these different interest groups, they overlap, right? And the potential to migrate from one to another and to start to build coalitions, I think, is our best hope. And it does require using the internet, which requires having a safe internet. And the level of surveillance, of course, I'm in Silicon Valley, and so I'm really looking at this. It's terrible.
Well,
Yeah, so that is an excellent idea that you're bringing up. I think that I would like to bring in the fact that this sense that people have that we already know that it's not an easy way to break through, but the idea that the breaking through, I think Mary's point was really important, that there is a level at which people's their own internal consciousness. I do think this is an issue of becoming conscious of something. And I would have to say that maybe part of our focus has to be on the actual people who are directly involved in the military itself. I mean, these people really need to be, they really need to, have serious questions about Alana, when you talk about we pay taxes that's supporting the military, the people who are actually making their living off the military are, I'd say that is a huge target group to really focus attention on. How do we get these warriors to be weaned? And the warriors are not just the ones carrying the guns. We're talking about all the people who are in any kind of support for the war. Okay, in any way, seeing their livelihood, and that's where I think this big, huge dot of the horror to the innocent would come from. The amount of people who don't want to see that connection because they really fear that they won't be able to tolerate working where they're presently working. So I think that's a natural focus we need to bring into this.
I mean, so much of our economy is caught up with the gears of the military-industrial complex that it's impossible to separate one from the other. I mean, we live in what's considered to be probably the most progressive, at least the next progressive state in the country, in Massachusetts. But the largest industrial manufacturer is, guess who? Raytheon. And you've got union pressure, you've got political pressure, you've got all kinds of issues surrounding that no matter what you want to do, what you get is a kind of you get a counterintelligence activity, knowing that you have to take your progressive people and channel their interests into other places and other things. And you can see, you got to be, that's why people in Massachusetts politics just shake their head and say, it's all a great idea, but when you actually get down to the bottom of it, you see the mechanism is very much, it's controlled in many ways. So that's why you have to be politically savvy in terms of dealing with these things. And that's what I'm trying to present, and that's what Liz is trying to present with our positions. And that's why we went to Afghanistan in the first place. Instead of just looking at joining a peace group or doing this or doing that, it was basically looking at what can we do personally to try to influence public opinion. How can you create an argument that's counter to the narrative and that's meaningful and relevant so that people will say, hey, that's worth listening to. So, I mean, that's what we wanted to do. That's what I believe Chris is doing. And Mira, you're an example of how that works in the real world. And Alana's been doing it all her life. So, and I know a lot of the other people that come to this website feel that way. So, once again, once you've embraced that personal idea that, this can be done, something can be done. And I think that when it becomes a matter of will, you can work with that and kind of influence the nature. I mean, we're really at a junction of creative capabilities for human beings that somewhere in the back of my mind, I've been thinking for a long time that all the power that's out there, like AI, it wants to suck out the intelligence and the life out of humanity, but reduce a three-dimensional world to a two-dimensional world. When the world that we came from wants to now become a four-dimensional world. So it wants to grow into a larger, take human beings, expand their capabilities, expand their compassion, expand their intelligence, and expand that into growing the earth into a larger consciousness, when the people who are benefiting from limiting that third dimensional consciousness want it flat landed. They want us to become something that we never were, really. So that's the real war that we are in right now. The war is to keep us suppressed and regressed into something that we've already extremely gone before.
Could I throw out one little thing? If you go, I don't know how many people have checked out indivisible.org. And if you go to indivisible.org and you put in your zip code, if you're in the United States, but not, it's a global organization. So there's some way, if you're in the UK, there are chapters. But anyway, indivisible.org is the group that brought out the No Kings protesters. And there's so many people I know who are so upset about what's going on, but they say to themselves, as I do, well, walking in the street and carrying a sign, other people can do that. I don't really have time to do that. What is amazing is that I was wrong, that they were able in October to bring out 7 million people. And then in the end of March to bring out 9 million people, the largest protest ever held in the history of humanity. But I don't know, because I'm not expert in this. They're trying to get 3.5% of the United States population, which would be about 11 million people. I think they may have maxed out. And what they need to move to for the next wave is this whole concept of special interest groups, coalitions, working on different topics and using that as a way to bring in the next wave who don't see themselves as protesters. So if anybody has ideas on that, let me know.
Alana, did you have some last words?
I just wanted to quickly respond to Paul's concern about military-industrial complex and employment and everything. Just to say, and I could try to find it and forward it, there's some very good details on military-industrial corporations' conversion to helpful peacetime activities. And there's a whole list of them for all different kind of military-industrial complex activities. And it's very, very visionary, very hopeful, and very doable. So that's what we need to have, that information when you go and you say, what about, we're going to lose all these jobs? No, we're going to keep all those jobs, but they're going to be doing things that support life, not war.
Yeah.
Amen. Amen. Well, Mr. Dillon said, waiting to find out what price you have to pay to get out of going through all these things twice. Lord have mercy. And, I like to end these again with the words from Mr. Kennedy. And, his peace speech didn't come out of nowhere. Okay, he was thinking about these things for quite a while, and this is a speech that he gave to the United Nations, September 25th, 1961. We meet in an hour of grief and challenge. Dag Hammarskjöld is dead, but the United Nations lives. His tragedy is deep in our hearts, but the task for which he died is at the top of our agenda. A noble servant of peace is gone, but the quest for peace lies before us. The problem is not the death of one man. The problem is the life of this organization. It'll either grow to meet the challenges of our age, or it'll be gone with the wind, without influence, without force, without respect. Were we to let it die, to enfeeble its vigor, to cripple its powers, we would condemn our future. For in the development of this organization rests the only true alternative to war. And war appeals no longer as a rational alternative. Unconditional war can no longer lead to unconditional victory. It can no longer serve to settle disputes. It can no longer concern the great powers alone. For a nuclear disaster spread by wind and water and fear could well engulf the great and the small, the rich and the poor, the committed and the uncommitted alike. Mankind must put an end to war, or war will put an end to mankind. Today, every inhabitant of this planet must contemplate the day when this planet may no longer be habitable. Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or by miscalculation or by madness. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us. Men no longer debate whether armaments are a symptom or a cause of tension. The mere existence of modern weapons, 10 million times more powerful than anything the world has ever seen, and only minutes away from any target on Earth, is a source of horror and discord and distrust. Men no longer maintain that disarmament must await the settlement of all disputes, for disarmament must be a part of any permanent settlement, and men may no longer pretend that the quest for disarmament is a sign of weakness. For in a spiraling arms race, a nation's security may well be shrinking even as its arms increase. It is in this spirit that a recent conference, recognizing that this is no longer a Soviet problem or an American problem, but a human problem, endorsed a program of general, complete, and strictly and international controlled disarmament. It is in this same spirit that we in the United States have labored this year with new urgency and with a new, now statutory agency fully endorsed by Congress to find an approach to disarmament which would be so far-reaching yet realistic, so mutually balanced and beneficial that it could be accepted by every nation. And it is in this spirit that we have presented the agreement of the Soviet Union, not to an arms race, but to a peace race, to advance together step by step and stage by stage until general and complete disarmament has been achieved. We invite them now to go beyond this agreement in principle and to reach on actual plans. The program to be presented to this assembly for general and complete disarmament under effective international control moves to bridge the gap between those who insist on a gradual approach and those who talk only of a final and total achievement. It would create the machinery to keep the peace as it destroys the machinery of war. It would proceed through balanced and safeguarded stages designed to give no state a military advantage over another. It would place the final responsibility for verification and control where it belongs, not with the big powers alone, not with one's adversary or oneself, but in an international organization within the framework of the United Nations. It would ensure the indispensable condition of disarmament, true inspection, and apply it in stages proportionate to the stage of disarmament. It would cover delivery systems as well as weapons. It would ultimately halt their production as well as their testing, their, their transfer as well as their possession. It would achieve, under the eyes of an international disarmament organization, a steady reduction in force, both nuclear and conventional, until it has abolished all armies and all weapons, except those needed for internal order and a new United Nations peace force. And it starts that process now, today, even as the talks begin. In short, general and complete disarmament must no longer be a slogan used to resist the first steps. It is no longer to be a goal without the means of achieving it, without the means of verifying its progress, without the means of keeping the peace. It is now a realistic plan and a test of those only willing to talk and a test of those willing to act. Such a plan would not bring a world free from conflict and greed, but it would bring a world free from the terrors of mass destruction. It would not usher in an era of the superstate, but it would usher in an era in which no state could annihilate or be annihilated by another. Finally, as the explosion of others beclouded the skies, my country was left with no alternative but to act in the interest of its own and the free world's security. We cannot endanger that security by refraining from testing while others improve their arsenals, nor can we endanger it by another long, uninspected ban on testing. For 3 years, we accepted those risks in our open society while seeking agreement on inspection. But this year, while we were negotiating in good faith in Geneva, others were secretly preparing new experiments in destruction. Our tests are not polluting the atmosphere. Our deterrent weapons are guarded against accidental explosion or use. Our doctors and scientists stand ready to help any nation measure and meet the hazards to health which inevitably result from the tests in the atmosphere. But to halt the spread of these terrible weapons, to halt the contamination of the air, to halt the spiraling nuclear arms race, we remain ready to seek new avenues of agreement. Our new disarmament program thus includes the following proposals. First, signing the test ban treaty by all nations. This can be done now. Test ban negotiations need not and should not await for general disarmament. Second, stopping the production of fissionable materials for use in weapons and preventing their transfer to any nation now lacking in nuclear weapons. Third, prohibiting the transfer and control over nuclear weapons to states that do not own them. Fourth, keeping the nuclear weapons from seeding new battlegrounds in outer space. Fifth, gradually destroying our existing nuclear weapons and converting their materials to peaceful uses. And finally, halting the unlimited testing and production of strategic nuclear delivery vehicles and gradually destroying them as well. To destroy arms, however, is not enough. We must create even as we destroy, creating worldwide law and law enforcement as we outlaw worldwide war and weapons. In the world we seek, the United Nations emergency forces, which have been hastily assembled, uncertainly supplied, and inadequately financed, will never be enough. In the endeavor to meet that vow, I pledge you every effort this nation possesses. I pledge you that we shall neither commit nor provoke aggression, that we shall neither flee nor invoke the threat of force, that we shall never negotiate out of fear, but we shall never fear to negotiate. Terror is not a new weapon. Throughout history, it has been used by those who could not prevail, either by persuasion or example. But inevitably, they fail, either because men are not afraid to die for a life worth living, or because the terrorists themselves came to realize that free men cannot be frightened by threats, and that aggression would meet its own response. And it is in the light of history that every nation today should know, be he friend or foe, that the United States has both the will and the weapons to join free men in standing up to their responsibilities. But I come here today to look across the world of threats to a world of peace. And in that search, we cannot expect any final triumph, for new problems will always arise. We cannot expect that all nations will adopt like systems, for conformity is the jailer of freedom and the enemy of growth. Nor can we expect to reach our goal by contrivance, by fiat, or even by the wishes of all. But however close we sometimes seem to that dark and final abyss, let no man of peace and freedom despair, for he does not stand alone. If we all can persevere, if we can in every land and office look beyond our own shores and ambition, then surely the age will dawn in which the strong are just and the weak secure and the peace preserved. Ladies and gentlemen of this assembly, the decision is ours. Never have the nations of the world had so much to lose and so much to gain. Together, we shall save our planet, or together, we shall perish in its flames. Save it we can, and save it we must, and then shall we earn the eternal thanks of mankind, and as peacemakers, the eternal blessings of God. Amen. I mean, I tell you, President Kennedy was a great man and was looking towards a better future than we have ensconced in ourselves right now. And so, thank you all for spending your time with us on this very important topic, and onwards to a better future for our children.
Right now, here.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Chris.
Thank
Amen.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.